All right. Welcome everyone to the August 29th Farcaster Dev Call. Agenda for today, we have a couple of Farcaster related topics. There's a big one in terms of ordering, which is a new sync model that we're thinking about thinking about implementing to help with all the sync issues on Farcaster. And the second one is improvements that we've been making to sign in with Farcaster. On the Warpcast side, there are a bunch of updates. Wanted to talk briefly about block, boost, caster rewards, some of the work going on with the Explore page to help with discovery of new apps, and some of the things we've been doing with integrating new wallets into the Warpcast app. So let's get started. I'll try to jump into the first topic and give a quick overview and see if we can pause for questions there. So the main proposal here is introducing ordering, and I'm going to drop a link in chat here in case anyone wants to follow along with this. But high level, we've noticed that as the network has gotten bigger, some of the sync issues that we're seeing, particularly across different hubs, are getting harder and harder to debug. And the main problem tends to be that the sheer size of the number of messages we're syncing is growing very, very large. And the fact that they are unordered is making the sync complicated. So if you go poke inside a Farcaster hub today, there's something like 500 million messages. And when a hub syncs with another hub, there's a chance that any one of these messages are missing or that it doesn't know about them. And so simply traversing the set of 500 million messages and trying to figure out which one is missing and joining them and merging them quickly is actually just getting way too slow for sync to work effectively at scale. And so it's just not feasible to assume that we can have this like very large unordered bag of stuff and we're looking through this all the time and finding stuff that's missing. We have to be able to say, hey, these 450 million messages, they're actually done and settled and like you don't have to worry about them. And you really need to focus on syncing these 50 million latest messages. And that's the idea behind ordering. If we're able to order these messages with some sort of like, this is the stuff that's come before, don't worry about this, and this is the new stuff, focus on sync here, that actually dramatically speeds up the rate at which we can sync and the confidence that we have that sync will actually bring us into sync with another hub on the network. So there's two broad proposals for this. The first one is account ordering, and the second one is global ordering. So account ordering introduces the idea that like, hey, every account is responsible for creating a sequence of casts. So you don't just like dump everything into a bag. You say, this is my first cast, this is my second thing, this is my third thing, and all your messages are ordered in that line. And there's a very simple idea that if I have 500 of your messages, and if another hub has 550 messages, all I need to do is sync the 50 messages that are missing. And because everything is ordered exactly the same, I just have to zoom ahead to 500, grab the new 50, put them in my bag, and then we're done. So this makes the problem a lot more trivial. There's some nuance to this idea, which is like, how do you deal with cases where like the client or the user submits the incorrect order and things like that. But there are like solutions that we have to these problems. And there's also the notion of like, how do you prevent different apps from conflicting? What if the user is using Nanar and Warpcast? And one solution we have there is actually making these sequences per app or per signer. So the idea is that each signer maintains its own sequence. And so, Nanar doesn't have to worry about interacting with Warpcast. They just have to make sure that their sequence number is established correctly and all of this user's data will sync. So that's the account ordering proposal. There's some trade-offs. I won't go into them in great detail, but the highest level thing is this is actually a fairly simple extension to our current model. It's something that we could implement relatively cheaply compared to the other solutions. The downside is it's not a perfect solution to all of our problems. It's the 80-20 where like things are going to get a lot better, a lot faster, but they're not as good as they could be. The second solution is global ordering. And so this is very similar to what a blockchain does, which is rather than just like have each account order its own stuff, you actually have, just like L2s have sequencers, you introduce the notion of sequencers for Farcaster, where there are some special hubs that have the ability to package things into blocks. And so they will grab messages from all users constantly. You can think of it as like a mempool, and they'll say, okay, these 500 messages are now in this block. This is finalized. This doesn't change. Here's the next block. Here's the next block. And so sync becomes very simple. You just say, how many blocks do I have? Great, I have 100. There's 10 more blocks. You just go download them, and now you're in sync. Again, much more trivial problem, and it offers a much cleaner solution to a bunch of the sub-problems like rate limits and packaging on-chain state and these other things that you can just bundle into this. The trade-off is that one is actually much harder to build up front, so it's going to take a lot longer, a lot of bigger re-architecture of the system. And two, it's less decentralized and is much more of an infrastructure challenge. There's only going to be one or two sequencers or a handful of sequencers producing these blocks, and if they go down, the network goes down. So the people running them have to invest a lot of time into making sure that they have very high reliability and uptime. Today, hubs don't have this issue, right? Like a hub can go down and come back up 5 minutes later. And like for the most part, things are just a little bit delayed. But in this version of the world, like you will actually have failures, messages won't get broadcast, they'll have to be resent and all of this stuff that makes this challenging. And to the point in chat, there's also an incentive question, which is like, why would you spend all of this money and time running this infrastructure? It's a lot harder than just running a hub. You have like a much higher bar for what you need to do here. So the number of people willing to do this will be a lot smaller. Okay, let me pause here and see if there's any questions or high level concerns about this approach.
Hey, yeah, this is Brian with Nanar. For sequencers, for running multiple sequencers, that's often like a pain point I've seen with other blockchains where like running one is easy, but then how do you merge four of them together, run by different teams? Are there plans on that, thoughts on that?
Yeah, it is a hard problem. I don't think there's like an easy like aha solution. The one thing that we have a lot easier than blockchains is that there's no transaction ordering is a convenience, not a necessity. Like blockchains have to have ordering for transactions, otherwise you have double spends. And so it's really, really bad. We don't actually care about ordering from the app perspective, right? Like if like Dan's cast shows up before your cast by like 30 seconds, it's fine. It's not the end of the world. The transaction ordering is just a convenience for making sync faster. And so that flexibility might allow us to say like, hey, there are actually two block producers at any time. There's an Anar block producer and there's a Warpcast block producer. And they're both allowed to produce blocks and they're, mutually exclusive or they can be overlapping and things like that. And so even if one goes down, the other can operate. It's still messy, it's still complex, but I think we will have an easier time implementing multiple sequencers and blockchains because we don't have the hard requirement of like having to prevent double spends. There's a few questions in chat. I think Sanjay's answered them, but let me just call them out. Would clients only consider casts mined in blocks? The high level is yes. In the global ordering world, you produce blocks, and we could produce them pretty quickly. 5 seconds, 15 seconds, a minute, like something in that threshold feels like the correct cadence. And by the way, Sanjay, Cassie, Aditi, if any of y'all want to step up and answer these questions, feel free to step up as well. Second question, is there a steady block time or just gets aggregated? Current thinking is steady block time is better for sync because then you kind of have a heartbeat and you know when you've missed a block, even if it's empty. Also, given network characteristics, it's very unlikely that even a 15-second block would be empty. So steady block time is probably the fastest synchronization path. Question on like what nonce management requires in clients. So the high level is like the responsibility of the client is to give each message a sequence number, starting from 0 and incrementing upwards, and to guarantee that this is monotonic, so that this actually just never changes. And a hub, if you send it a message, if you send a hub two messages that have the same sequence number 100, it will throw up its hands in a conflict. How exactly that conflict happens, we can actually tune and is up for discussion. But you can imagine that there's some like deterministic rule by which the hub says, hey, if I see this message and I already have one of this case, I'll pick the one with the lowest hash. And so the other sequence number gets eroded. So if you as an application make a mistake with your nonce, you might end up deleting some of the data that you've previously published. But good news is I think nonce management should be fairly straightforward. We've done it a lot with ETH wallets. It just requires you pinging your hub, checking the latest nonce, and then pushing another nonce. And if you're ever switching between different hubs, being careful that you are not sending multiple nonces at the same time to multiple hubs. So there's sort of the single tenancy model of like, you want to make sure that you're consistent against at least one hub. Cool. There's another question about like delay times and block times. So Daniel's sort of raising a concern that like, hey, 5 second block time, 5 seconds for bots to react and react to new cast plus 5 seconds. It feels like these delays could start to add up. The way we've thought about like delays on the social network is like in a largely distributed system, you're never going to get stuff delivered in like sub 1 second when you have thousands and thousands of nodes. The guarantee that we've sort of thought of at this level is like, hey, your P95 or P99, your P99 is around a minute. So 99% of your cast will arrive across all the different hubs in a minute. Your P95 might actually be something very low, like 5 to 10 seconds. So like 95% of cast arrive very quickly. And then your, 3 9s or 4 9s might actually extend to 10 minutes to an hour, where there's like one cast that gets stuck or a hub that goes down temporarily or has some like network issues and whatnot. And so it takes a little bit longer to circulate. I think it's actually worked fine. Like for the most part, a 50 to 20 second delay for bots has been pretty acceptable in the sort of feed model. And for anything faster, I think DCs offer a better experience where they offer like faster response times and people can interact with those a lot more quickly. The other thing that you can do is like there's also a mempool. So this is very similar to how blockchains work. And you have a cast that are like not yet confirmed, but you know that they're out there and they're about to be confirmed. So you can queue up things that are ready to go and start to prepare things. So it's not like you have to wait for the 5 seconds. You already have some preview of what's going to happen in the next 5 seconds. A question about like finality point where repeat nonce won't get accepted. So that's actually an interesting idea where there's a comment down here from Aditya proposing like a finalizing or a sealing. We still have to explore this idea. There's a version where things are not sealed and then nonce collisions are just handled by so this is in the account model. Nonce collisions are handled by hashes. So if you were to go and publish like a nonce with a different hash, you would just end up nuking your other nonce, and that can actually happen deterministically, and there's no sealing. It's a very simple system, but there's a little bit of a foot gun in case you ever make a mistake, you could wipe some of your history. The other model is to actually have some kind of sealing. There's a high-level proposal here, where actually after a certain amount of time has passed, you cannot modify a nonce that's older than a certain amount. And so your older history is actually protected and sealed to a certain extent. Cool. I don't see any other questions in chat. So if no one has anything else, we will move on to the next topic. Okay, just to wrap this up, this is still very much an exploratory mode. At a very high level, we are like slightly more in favor of account ordering than global ordering right now, but we are exploring both branches. And our next step is to flesh out the design to a point where we have high conviction in all these edge cases. What happens when nonsense conflict? How does pruning actually work in this model? How does the gossip and the diff sync model get tuned and all of this stuff? So expect us to take like a week, maybe a couple of weeks to actually like flesh out this design more. And then if we're all on board with it, move forward to implementation. I think the main purpose behind all of this and the reason we're doing all of this is once we're done with this change, sync will be a lot easier. The issues of like my hub is missing message X and Y and why is this happening will be a lot less frequent and B, much easier to debug and resolve when they do happen. And so it's going to be a net positive for the network. It will not be a simple change. Whenever we do this, we will probably have to invoke some downtime because hubs will have to go down and upgrade all their messages. So there may be a few hours where the messages can't actually flow between clients. And so we'll make sure to communicate all of that if and when we get this scheduled. All right. With that, let's move on to the second topic. I'll turn over to Dan or Horsefax or Pearl, whoever wants to step up to talk about the sign-in with Farcaster improvements.
Yeah, so we shipped, or Connor really drove this, Horsefax, the improved sign-in with Farcaster flow. So just to kind of recap, we reduced the size of the URLs to something simpler to make it a much simpler QR code. So kind of think of like a menu in a restaurant versus whatever we had before, which kind of was like, I don't know, the entire Bible in a single QR code. So the thought here is that with lower end cameras and just given the long tail of Android devices, in addition to just like iOS not being the most like friendly for a lot of people, when you try to like get a QR code, tap it and it thinks you're autofocusing. The goal is to just try to dramatically reduce the the complexity of the QR code to make it easier to scan for people. And then we set ourselves up for a future iteration where if you look at the actual URL in this cast, you can kind of see that we have a code. And I think it's, what is it, Connor? I think it's like 8 characters. The 8
characters.
Yeah, so it sets us up for in a future iteration where we can allow you to have a fallback similar to like if you were signing in on a TV like Netflix. I think we talked about this last time, but kind of now this is all implemented. I think based on looking at the data and just like overall complaints, things seem to be working better with the existing system. So I think we're paused on any additional improvements with sign-in for Farcaster for now. If we were to prioritize additional improvements for sign-in with Farcaster, I think the areas we would look into are, one, kind of working on adding the manual code to both Warpcast. The second one would be investigating and kind of writing out a full doc on whether or not we should move towards an EDDSA, so signer-based approach rather than custody address. I think we've kind of talked about that in the past of like the pros and cons of that. Obviously, that would make it easy for something like Supercast or any other app that has a signer to actually be kind of like the web companion version. But there are some additional security risks. Ultimately, the reason we're not prioritizing this is no one has come to us and said, this is the top priority. And so we're kind of working off our own set of things that we think are like burning problems. But to the degree that people have specific feedback on sign-in with Farcaster, not in a, here's how I would improve it, but this is the top priority for me and why, that's actually really helpful. Because if it does end up becoming top priority, we're going to solicit a lot of input and say, hey, here's the direction we think we're going to improve for it. But I think like there are a bunch of other things we'll talk through that like, kind of the developer unit, which is Horsefax and Pearl and myself are kind of like putting effort into, because the other group of people are actually all working on hubs in sync, which I think is foundational for the network. Great, good to hear, Woj, that you're happy with them. But to the degree that people have other critiques about the improvement and how it could potentially be better within the current constraints of the system, we're very open to that. Okay, I think Varun, we can, unless no one else has any questions, Varun, feel free to move on to block.
Cool. We'll wait 10 seconds. All right, block. So we announced this a couple of days ago. We shipped this yesterday. Warpcast now has a block button. So you can go to a user's profile, you can block them. And when you block someone, they're not going to be able to quote cast or reply to you using Warpcast. So if they go click the button, they find the cast, they'll get an error. And these users aren't going to show up in your feed or your notifications or your search results anymore. So you're not going to come across these users in any way. Important to mention, blocks, unlike mutes, are public. So that is like one primary distinction, which is that they are actually visible to everyone. And we actually have an API. So if Supercast or others wanted to copy the block list and enforce it on their clients, you can actually fetch this data over the API, and the link is here. I'll drop this document over here so people can kind of read through this. A couple of callouts. So one is why block? Well, what's the difference between block and mute? Why are you doing this? Until now, I think mute has been sufficient for the most part. Like you follow somebody, you don't really want to see their stuff, you're able to hit mute and they kind of just get taken out of your feed. And that was like very convenient and it actually helped. As the network has gotten bigger, I think we've seen, again, a very small number of users and on the margins, but like more and more trolling behavior happening where people are like quote casting, reply spamming, or aggressively going after certain users. And it's a very unpleasant experience for them. Block is a one level higher defense that is going to make it harder for these people to troll these other people. So the first thing that it does is it just makes it harder to quote cast or reply cast. So you have to like go and try to like work outside it or send your message directly to hubs or something. And over time, we're going to improve block to the point where if people follow you, they're not going to see replies to your cast from people that you blocked and so on. So generally, mute is mostly, I don't want to see this stuff. This person is fine, like let them be. Block is, I really don't want my followers or anyone who follows me to like have to interact with this person in my comments. So it's a much stronger form of the mute. It's very similar to how it works on most social networks, particularly how it works on Twitter. There are going to be a couple of important things to know about. First one is block is not, so on centralized apps like Twitter, when you block somebody, you can actually literally enforce that nobody can see your casts ever again. You can just kind of block it because you have to be logged in to see stuff. On a decentralized network like Farcaster, there's always going to be a way to work around. I can go to the hubs and pull your data. I can log into like an open source client that doesn't implement the block list or something like that, and I can pull this data. So block will never truly stop someone from seeing your casts. It just adds a little bit more friction in that capacity. Again, it also can't truly stop someone from replying to your cast. You can go to a hub and broadcast a message that says, I'm replying to Dan. It's just that clients that respect the block list will then filter this out and make this less likely to appear. And for all intents and purposes, if 80% of the majority clients like end up implementing this, like if Warpcast, Supercast, HeroCast all have this block list, then it effectively operates and works in the way that you would expect block to work. Second thing is our version of block is still a V1, and there's a lot of stuff missing that you would expect in a final version of block. So for example, there's no easy way to unblock somebody. You have to like type in their URL today, go to their profile and unblock them. We're working on like a block list that will make this better. Block doesn't also stop the other person from being able to see your stuff on Warpcast today. That's something we want to add. We just haven't gone and added this in yet, and we will add this in the future. Okay, that's the high level on block. I think there's a few questions in chat, which I will take. And
Varun, do you just want to talk about how you think about whether we put this in the protocol, prioritizing it as a protocol primitive, like how we're approaching that?
yeah, the high level is block lists are now public, and we'll see how people A, use the feature in Warpcast, and B, how other developers and other people are using the data over the API. If this becomes something that people really want and use a lot of, we can actually try to make block lists available at the protocol. It will be a little tricky because if you have a very large block list, it will actually take up a lot of your storage consumption and whatnot. But there are ways for us to go and work around this. But we really want to make sure that people are actually using this feature, that it is something that's necessary before we go and protocolize it. And again, we'll make sure we commit to keeping an open API so that everybody who wants to copy the block list can do that today. Yeah, a question for what could it work as a link? Yeah, basically it would just be a message type, and whether it's a link or a new message type, we can go add it in. Links make sense. We already have that. The question is just, do you want to be using your follow space for blocks, or do you want this to be a new dedicated space? So there's some nuance and details to go figure out, but I think we can do that as well. Question on whether you can see blocks in the Nanar API. So I think Manan's already answered that one, but I think Nanar is working on adding support for blocks and block APIs for people. Does block involve the entire cast tree or just direct replies? Daniel, not sure I understood that question.
Yeah, sorry. So when you block someone, they can't quote cast or reply to you. Is that just reply to you directly, like 1 degree down? Or for example, if I cast and then Linda replies, but then someone else that I block replies to Linda's cast, like is that possible or not?
The intention is for this to eventually work for the entire tree, as you pointed out. I think the V1 implementation might not have that yet. So it might be possible to go and explore a conversation view or type in a URL, go to Linda's cast, and then reply to it and have that work. But that's the thing we plan to improve as we invest in block.
Thank you.
So one thing that would be super helpful, if you are using block, and there are annoyances with the feature, certain things that aren't working, certain things you wish happen, we would love to get feedback. We are going to prioritize improving block based on the kinds of feedback we get. If we hear nothing from users, we may just leave it as is. And if we hear certain annoyances, then we're going to start improving this. And specific example with casts where things are breaking through or annoying are always helpful for us to prioritize. Is there a mute list? How do we find the users who muted? So we don't have a mute list today. We're planning to introduce a mute and block list where you can see both of those people, both of those lists, and you can go and turn it off if you'd like. Will there be a public dashboard to gauge the adoption of this feature? We're not planning to build one right now, but it should be fairly simple if you wanted to just use our APIs and just throw it on a UI. Maybe Nanar or someone else is thinking about this, or maybe someone's built a frame for this already. Will mutes and blocks be public info? Mutes will not be public. There's a strong expectation that mutes are private and that other people don't know if you've muted them. So that will not be public. Blocks will be public because that is actually something that is visible to the other user. One way to think about it is if you've muted someone, they have no idea you've muted them. they can still do everything. They can see your cast, they can interact with you. It's just you've chosen not to see any of their stuff. With blocks, you're actually preventing them from interacting with you. So it is by definition visible to them, and we make it public over an API. There's no mute API. Cool. There's a few more questions. It could be interesting to expose mutes to apps to sign up for your account. Yeah, I think that's a cool idea. Like there might be like a nice privacy preserving way to like actually expose mutes. It hasn't been like a top priority so far, but if that is actually becoming something that is super important for people to import, we can kind of make that happen. Block watch. Is that an actual LinkedIn? Should I click on this? Oh, that's cool. So there's already a block checker that you can use to find out who blocked you on Farcaster.
Bren, you could put your name in and
Oh,
see.
let's go. Let's see. It's probably no blocked users. Oh, this is me blocking other people. Okay, I want to see who's blocked me. But I guess that's not a feature on here yet. Cool. MJC shipped this. Yeah, MJC, I think that'll be the killer feature. Everybody wants to know who's crapping on them. Cool. I had to do a lot of testing on this by blocking Dan, so I actually had trouble finding his cast this morning to pull them up for the meeting. Let me see if there's any more questions. Okay, I think we got all the questions. If I missed anything, 10 seconds to. Will block auto unfollow? Yes, block will unfollow the user. It will drop. You won't follow them, and so if you unblock them, you'll have to refollow them again. Out of curiosity, why is blocker FID the only parameter not blocked FID? So I'm assuming this is for the API. We haven't shipped that version yet. I can talk to Chris and see if that's something that we can add if it's useful to people. Cool. All right, let me go back to
private accounts, just lower priority. I don't think we have plans to do it because it doesn't have anything to do with the Farcaster protocol. There's a version of the world where I'm sure people could create some encryption at the client level that then could do it, but that would be something someone else would go and build.
Yep. Okay, two other features I want to talk about quickly. So one of the things we've been really focused on is how can we help give incentives to accounts that are posting good content, particularly newer accounts that are joining later and that may not have as large of a following, and that are trying to build up their accounts. So the first feature that we launched is Boost. So you can read about it here. I'll drop this link in chat so people can follow along. But the high level behind Boost is Warpcast gives out boosts to about 10 accounts every day. And if your account gets boosted, it means a lot more people are going to see your casts, especially people who don't already follow you for the next 24 hours. We select people for boosts right now. The way we select people to be eligible is one, we select small accounts. So you have to have less than 10,000 followers to be eligible. We make sure that it's someone who is casting. We don't want to give boost to an account that's inactive. And we also don't give you a boost if you've just gotten one recently. So we try to spread it around between a bunch of different accounts. And the last thing is we have a manual filtering process where like I go through these accounts and make sure they're actually casting interesting things before we give out the boosts. And so we try to ensure that they're kind of spread around between a bunch of accounts and help them build up their following. We're collecting a lot of stats on like, does this actually, increase your following? Does it increase your views, your likes, etc.? And we'll share some of those once this experiment has run for a few weeks.
Varun, I think there was a misconception yesterday that you have to be following the person as the manual judge. And I think like it's an internal tool we have to surface the accounts and then we review them, right?
Yep. So the way we're thinking about Boost right now is we want to run this experiment for a few weeks, make sure that people are actually getting a positive impact on the boost, make sure that we're dialing in all the parameters right, how long Boost lasts for, when you get notified, et cetera, et cetera. And if this works, we'll keep rolling this out, and this will just be a constant thing Warpcast does to help people build their following on Farcaster. Okay, let me pause there and see if there's any questions. Sweet. Okay, everybody's happy with the boost. Will the boosted people be increased over time? So I assume the question is about like how many people we give boost to. So the biggest constraint is like the number of people active on Farcaster. If we boost like 100 people, we would have to inject their casts into a lot of other feeds, which would then make your feed filled with much less stuff that you follow and much more stuff that's like recommended by us to you. And so there's sort of a balance there where we don't want to do too much of it and overwhelm your feed. So with the number of daily users we have now, 10 to 15 is probably the number that we can handle without saturating. But as Farcaster grows, and specifically as Warpcast's daily users grow, we can probably start boosting a larger number of users. So if we go 10x from here, we can be boosting 100 accounts instead of 10 accounts. Cool. Separate question. There are a lot of public Notion docs. Is there a directory to see all of these? So a lot of these docs, particularly the boost doc and the block doc, they're all linked from the feature itself. So if you open the thing where you get a boost and there's like a learn more, you can tap into it and you're taken to this feature. That's kind of where we use them. But we'll try to make a directory of this so there's actually a place where you can go and see all of this stuff. The API docs, on the other hand, you can actually find them on docs.farcaster.xyz. So if you just go here and search for, let's see if the search works. Okay, I think Algolia hasn't indexed this because we published this recently. It only reindexes once a week. But if you actually go to the Warpcast API docs and kind of drill down into the specific API, like I'll post a link to this here. This API reference should have all of the API docs. And I believe, yep, blocked users is right down here at the very bottom. So Warpcast APIs, you should be able to get them here, but the product feature docs, feedback taken, that would be useful to have like a collection of them. Okay, going through the chat to see if there's any questions. Had a question, rewriting blocks back to Warpcast. How hard is it to implement using signer-based auth? If the question is about writing blocks back, we can probably figure out some smart way to do it without having to use signers. Like, for example, if it's primarily Nanar and Supercast writing back, we can establish like a trusted channel to do that for V1. And then we can do something a little more elegant with like signer-based auth for V2. So let us know if that's something that you're thinking of building and we can make that work.
Yeah, so this has been something that has been requested every time, like there's mute, there's or even like channel follows, like channel decentralization was gonna unlock some of that, but we punted on channel decentralization for other initiatives, and rightfully so. But it has been blocking developers to take right actions and have that be reflected back on Warpcast. I think like there's probably some auth middleware that Warpcast uses to authenticate that, okay, this block came in from this user, or this channel follow came in for that user. This would just be like an alternative thing to use a signer-based auth, and it would unlock like a bunch of things that we can write back to Warpcast if there's a building block that we can have such that without decentralization, we can experiment across multiple clients. And this has been across like multiple features, which is why I'm asking specifically with regards to signer-based auth, which would unlock a bunch of these all at the same time.
Cool. I think like we'd be happy to start with that for like one specific feature. So if you guys are like, hey, block is the thing that we want to write back to, let's start with that. I think that's something that we could work on. So if you want to ping us offline, we can figure out a way to make that. Okay. Cool. Let me see if there's any questions. Okay, +1s from Supercast. Cool. Okay, caster rewards. The other experiment that we're running to help accounts is to give out rewards to users who are posting good content. So I'll again share this cast here. Warpcast is basically giving out $5 a day to each of the top 100 casters through the rest of the year. And the way rewards work is every day we look at the amount of engagements that your cast get, and we divide it by the number of active followers that you have. So people who've been using the protocol and liking things in the last few days. The reason we do this balancing is because if we didn't do that and we just went by engagement, the largest accounts in the network or the earliest accounts in the network would get all of the engagement and all of the rewards. So this actually gives you a pretty big opportunity to get to the top. If you are a newer account that has a few followers, but a lot of them are actually engaging with your cast and finding it interesting. We'll probably tweak this algo over time and measure what the impact is. I think we're hoping to see a positive impact in terms of like it's encouraging more and more people to cast, put out more content. And we're going to be running this every day. The rewards go around 9 to 10 a.m. Where the rewards get distributed is it's completely on-chain on Base. So the 5 USDC goes straight to your connected wallet. If you don't have a connected wallet, you'll get a push notification telling you that you should connect a wallet and you'll be eligible for the next reward. And if you have multiple connected wallets, it's going to go to the most recently connected wallet in that list. The other thing that we do is we filter out engagement from low quality spammy accounts or accounts that are just like blank and have no context and we don't know if they're good or not. So there's a bias towards only weighting engagement from accounts that are like known good and that don't have a lot of these like low quality markers. How would we determine low quality? We already have a system for doing this for surfacing stuff in your cast. So when you open a cast conversation, there's already a spam classifier that moves low quality stuff to below replies. So if something is low quality, its engagement is not going to get counted. So you can't like spin up a bot ring and farm money. It's actually going to be pretty hard to get past that today. Any thoughts on providing rewards for developers? We run the grants program. We've done this like every quarter. The last one went out 3 months ago. We distributed a bunch of rewards to developers building open source applications. We've been experimenting with different variations of how to do rewards to actually drive incentives. And I think we're still iterating on that. And I would say we've only been like moderately successful. I would say that with the grants program, more than half of the people we gave grants to ended up not working on the thing. And so it seems to be like working in some cases, but not in others. And so we're trying to dial that in. So every quarter, we'll probably experiment with some developer reward mechanism to actually incentivize the best developers to keep building on the platform. And the goal would be that people who get the rewards are actually excited and motivated to keep building, and the reward is sufficient enough to motivate them to do that. Would you consider other parties to chip into the rewards pool? I think the beauty of it being on chain is like you can just mirror these rewards. So if you just wanted to add 10 cents to every Warpcast reward, you could just look at the list of people we're rewarding every day. It's all on chain. There's a Dune dashboard, and you could just like mirror those rewards. So there's a very easy way to just do it on chain. But if people are doing that or want to like combine it on transactions, there's probably ways we could combine it.
The one thing I would say there is it just creates more accounting for us. So we have a big work to do around taxes for this. So my thing would just be you should just run it independently.
Yeah, can we let people select a primary wallet? So there's like a hacky way to do this today, which is why we haven't prioritized this. The hacky way is your most recently connected wallet is your primary wallet. So if you wanna just make something primary, just disconnect your older wallet and reconnect it. And then for all intents and purposes in Warpcast, it's primary. At some point, we will get around to shipping the feature that lets you select a primary wallet. But one interesting thing to note is it's not a panacea, right? So you could issue a message on chain to select a primary wallet, and then you could disconnect that wallet. And then we run into all kinds of issues where we still have to handle the case where the user has not declared a primary wallet. So for now, the simplest heuristic that works for like 99.9% of people is just reconnect the wallet you care about the most to be your latest, and Warpcast will send everything you care about to that wallet. How about introducing a weekly nomination system where users can suggest accounts for boosts, and small accounts often struggle to get their cast noticed? Yeah, it's a good idea. We've been thinking about like creating a way where people can sponsor or nominate. For now, you can just DC me with accounts that you think should get a boost, and I'll take a look at them. And if at some point the number of suggestions gets so large, we'll try to build an automated or nomination system. Ooh, let me see if there's other questions. Okay, I think that's all we have for now. And I'll give people like 10 seconds to maybe throw out another question before we move on to the next topic.
On the sustainability, it's sustainable. Like it's not that expensive in the scheme of things for Merkle. Like I think the bigger issue, does it make an impact in terms of growing the network?
What kind of casters are you looking for regarding people you want to reward? I think it is just content that other people and humans find interesting on the network. So this ranges from like people talking about things happening in crypto to people sharing their latest interesting project to people posting videos of things that they're doing in different categories in areas like fitness and making recipes and whatnot. There's no like checklist or formula. Like there's a good chance of like you'll know good content when you see it because you'll find it interesting. And that's why there's always a human element to selecting some of this, because anytime you try to do something that's algorithmic or automated, it's just super easy to game. Is there a type of content that does well, long form or short form or memes? We haven't done the analysis, but you could probably figure that out on chain. So you could just pull the list of stuff on chain and see what the users casted on the day before they got, or the 2 days before they got their rewards, and try to do some analysis. I imagine people will start trying to reverse engineer this and see what happens. Right now, we just look at the final outcome. We just look at like who is liking this stuff, and whatever gets likes gets reward. We haven't actually like, we're not biasing the algo towards like prioritizing long form versus short form versus video. That's more of an emergent property of what are people clicking like on. Will languages other than English get this USDC? There's no restriction on language content in terms of being able to be selected for the rewards. I will probably say that since it is based on engagement and the amount of likes that you get, posting something in a language that most people on Farcaster don't speak probably reduces your chances of getting that reward to some extent, but it is balanced out by the fact that we only look at your active followers. So if you're posting in, I don't know, Turkish, and you have a small group of very active Turkish followers who like your content, we probably will get the reports. Okay, we're running out of time, so let me try to quickly get through the other two items. And if there are any more questions on caster rewards, we're happy to take them async. So let me turn over to Dan or Connor or Pearl to talk quickly about Explore and mobile wallet protocol.
Yeah, so just two quick things. Explore page, we continue to add things, add new apps. I think we're over 150 apps at this point, and we have another 50 or so submissions that we have to kind of go through. So we're actually quite pleased with the number of people who've submitted the stuff that they're working on, and it's just kind of really cool to have one place of finding everything that's going on in the Farcaster ecosystem. A couple other things about Explore. There've been a bunch of requests of adding like media and other types of non-app creations. I think we're still considering that. I think the simplest way is if you have media that is a frame that fits into the store today. So I actually think that's the easiest way to get in this. I keep using store, Explore. But basically, the idea of getting in this kind of tab and getting the showcase, submit your frame and basically say, hey, look, I built this thing on Farcaster. This frame helps it work. And I think that is an easy way to do it while we don't have other potential categories. Still, again, considering where to focus on here. The other thing, and I think this is more important from a developer standpoint, is we added the experiment for Flappycaster built by Matthew Fox. It's basically composer action, but rather than forcing you to go to the composer and then launching it from there, we just kind of created a unit on the Explore page that you can just kind of tap and then open up. I am very interested to see what people would want to build here. So I would highly encourage you to reach out, and not necessarily just with like an idea, but like if I get access to having one of these units, this is what I would go build, or take my existing composer action, and here's all the additional functionality that I would want to go do. I think it's going to help inform whether or not we prioritize working on effectively a mini app platform similar to something like Telegram has. Because there's a lot of other things that we can add here in terms of bi-directional communication between the web page in the app and the Warpcast app. There's things like we could add warps. So the idea of like these like really seamless in-app purchases type feel that actually are compliant with the App Store, because warps are compliant with the App Store. So there's a bunch of things that we can go do and prioritize, but we don't want to go build Legos before we have a group of people to say like they're beating down the door for this, because there's a zillion other things we can actually go work on to improve the developer experience. And with that said, let me just talk about mobile wallet protocol, because this is actually what we're working on this week. So Horsefax has been working on integrating Rainbow. So they have a build, alpha. They have a build with mobile wallet protocol. It's working really well. There are a few kinks that we're still working out with actually mobile wallet protocol on the Coinbase side, so they have some to-dos, but I think we have a good workaround for the time being. And the reliability of the Coinbase wallet connection, we're still kind of trying to work on a few improvements there. It seems like somehow Safari or Chrome browsing history can actually get that into a bork state. But Coinbase is really committed to making this work. And we're pretty happy that another 30 or so % of people, at least whenever we survey what people do on mobile, will have a wallet of their choice that they can actually go use for transaction frames, which I actually think is, especially with Moxie and a lot of the other kind of frames that are out there right now, just like getting transaction frames to work 99.9% of the time is like very much a priority right now from a developer standpoint. With that said, I'd be curious if there are any questions. Okay, let's see. PWA, all right, let me see. He said mini app, okay. I've spent 10 hours in Farcaster. All right. So mini apps, I think the way we're thinking about this is, one, we would really need to actually kind of see a group of people that are like day one, we're ready to launch if we've got to kind of go work on this. I think the simplest way to kind of iterate towards this is actually allow deep linking to composer actions, so that if you have a composer action, effectively it is acting like a mini app, but it is in the context of the composer rather than a feed or somewhere else in the app. But I think we can kind of work our way from there. The other thing that I think we really need to understand is what are the features that exist with composer actions today versus the ideal for whatever you're building. Like what information would you want to be able to pass back and forth, and letting specifically Horsefacts know, like, hey, this is what I would build if you had these types of APIs. Collecting that and allowing us to kind of think about, like, okay, is this worth working on right now versus later? All that information would be really useful. Connor, do you see any of these other questions? I think they're a little bit more technical, and so I'd leave it to you to answer. Maybe like mini apps automatically parse FID kind of thing.
Yeah. So in the existing composer action system we have now, the action gets a frame message on the initial request, and that's kind of how we're handling providing identity information. I think if we move towards a more kind of robust, full-scale mini app framework, probably we continue to use the frame message in some way, because you get these nice properties of having cryptographically signed communication. But maybe we're posting a frame message back and forth over a window post message channel rather than that initial request. But yeah, that's a little bit TBD. That's the one thing I think if we get a lot of interest in mini apps, we can think about exactly what that looks like. But fundamentally, we'll probably continue to use some notion of signed frame messages for this client to app communication.
Yeah, and just so people kind of have a understanding of like why we're not just like immediately jumping on it. There's also a version of the world where we say, hey, frames, we have a lot of people using frames. Frames are slow. There are a bunch of complaints about frames that people wish were better. And we sit down and we actually just like grind through those set of quality of life improvements that apply to every single frame that's been built, rather than a brand new shiny object that like kind of is disregarding the thing that actually exists in feeds. I think there's a separate thing and very early thinking in this in terms of just like, okay, you have composer actions, cast actions, frames. Now you're going to have mini apps. Like this starts to get confusing. And so actually kind of thinking through like, what is a frame? What is a mini app? And maybe potentially throwing away this concept of actions as a separate thing. And it's basically, it's just, there are apps you can invoke within the context of a cast, the composer, maybe even a profile or a channel. And then there are kind of units that sit in either a feed or a direct message frame that kind of have a call to action for you to do something, whether that's a transaction or launching an app. So I think that there's like a decent amount of thinking that we would kind of want to put together, because I think that the sprawlingness of all of these Legos is actually kind of confusing. And so that's just another back burner item for us to kind of think about, because I would like to get to a place where we have like a very tight, this is how you build on Farcaster. Here are the Legos. Here is which Lego you want to use. And like basically answer fundamentally the question that most developers have are, I want to get users for my app. And so it's like, what is the playbook by which you do that? Like how to use a frame versus a full app context. And so I think that's one thing. I think two, the critique I'd have of mini apps overall is like, we could go do a bunch of work on this. And the reality is like, do actually most people on Farcaster want to interact with another app in like a web view versus actually kicking out to another app? And the answer could be very well like, yes, there's like 60% of apps like you don't want to download another app. It's simple enough that you just actually kind of want to interact with it in an app that you have. But just like to be super clear, I consider Telegram is like an international app, and there has never been an app in the US, which the predominant like core of this network is still US based. The super app thing is like, you know, it's a mirage. Like ultimately in the US, like US consumers, and I would lump, you know, Europe in there as well, like they use multiple apps. And I think internationally you have the concept of super apps. But I'm very open to it because crypto, there's a lot of context that can actually happen as a result of like both your Farcaster kind of like FID and everything you have there, warps, and potentially, you know, the ability to initiate transactions. Yeah, so iMessage game is a great example. I don't know anyone. I've lived in Silicon Valley for 10 years. I don't know anyone who plays an iMessage game. And so again, it's like there are different populations in the world of people who play this stuff, but like I think it's always a little scary building something for you know, basically users that don't exist. But that said, like I very much can see the value. I think Flappycaster is an amazing example of just like really well executed, constrained, it like works. And so it's like, okay, can other people build really high quality experiences like this? And then what other additional kind of Legos and hooks can we give into the like overall Farcaster social experience? Vern, I know I'm way over time, so. Cool. Here's what I would encourage. I will put a cast out in FC devs like right now. And if you kind of want to have open discussions about this item and like people can kind of be going back and forth, I think it would actually be really valuable to have on network rather than in the chat moving at a very fast speed.
Yep. Yeah. Since we're out of time and people have stuff they want to talk about, let's move this offline or online to FC. And if there's questions that we don't get to, we'll always pick them up in the next dev call 2 weeks from now. All right. Thanks everyone for coming, folks. And thanks for all the great questions. We will talk soon.